Hello and welcome to week three. Hope all of you guys are doing good, hanging in there. Course is moving right along. We'll be halfway through it before you know it. These 8-week courses seem to move really quick. I'm joining you guys from a little bit different of a setting this time. Right, the last two mini lectures I've given were at my house, and this one's from my office. And so as we get started, couple of things, a couple of key pointers I want to give you. First of all, welcome to week three. And I just want to say good job on the group discussion boards all around. I saw some really interesting and intellectual conversations. I remember the first time that I was asked to take the film The Matrix and think about it, right, from this philosophical and theological perspective. And it's interesting the parallels that you're able to put together. And I saw a lot of you guys putting those parallels together and seeing kind of what the creator of the film and what the overall storyline and theme of the film was really trying to communicate. So well done on that. Thank you guys for dealing with some of the difficulties that come along with group discussion boards. It does make it a little bit complicated trying to take students and to put them into that small group format, but I do hope that you were able to see the benefit of doing that. I most certainly see the benefit of you guys doing that and kind of discussing it in that small group format. So all around, well done. A couple other things that I do want to address as you guys progress forward, just some things that I'm seeing, overall pointers, nothing really specific or particular, but overall things that I want to just remind you of to make sure that you're being as successful in the course as possible, not only in your grade, but also in your understanding and your knowledge and information of the course as you address these things, because these have life-altering implications, right, of the things that you're learning, especially in a worldview and epistemology course as you move forward, and just in your overall thinking of the things that you do in work and family and life and in church. But when you do answer the discussion boards, one thing I want to make clear is make sure that you fully address the question. One of the most common things I saw of people who missed a couple of points on the discussion board is they were not fully addressing the discussion board question. So I'll give an example of it when we go to the next page and we look at the discussion board. But one of the things I've seen, you don't have to do it this way, but students who are taking the question, the discussion board, and let's say there's 3 questions like there were in last week's, and they break it down into the first question, then they give their answer, and then they break it down and they list that second question, and then they give their answer. They seem to fare a little bit better because it's a way of ensuring that they're addressing each part of that question. So regardless how you do it, just make sure that you're going through and specifically making sure that you're addressing each particular portion of the question that's being answered and actually addressing it, not just talking about it in generalities, but being very intentional and purposeful in addressing those. Another thing I want to encourage you to do is make sure that you go through the readings with purpose and intent in preparation for your final paper. Make sure you're taking time. There's a lot of materials, a lot of reading that's given to you. My lectures are very short for that reason. The coursework material is really just focused on that, of you culminating this final worldview paper. And so you've got to be very careful, in particular, taking time to go through it. So make sure that you're going through, taking notes, making note of particular areas, maybe marking it up. I'm always with a highlighter and a pencil, and I have my own keys that I use of a squiggly line means this, and just a straight highlight or an underline. Always trying to emphasize these things as I'm trying to digest the text, because you guys do have a lot of reading in this course. Also, please make sure that your initial posts are posted by Thursday. This was a little bit of an issue with the group discussion board, that people were not posting maybe a little bit more promptly as they could have. So please make sure, as far as you are able to, the earlier the better you can make those posts. It gives more time for your classmates to engage, to think about it, to think through it, rather than just doing that and waiting to the last minute. So I really want to encourage you guys, exhort you guys to make sure that you are posting those earlier than later. And also the group discussion boards that you posted that were due just this Sunday, those I'll have graded, and give me a couple of days on those. I'll have those graded by Wednesday, no later than Thursday of this week. And then also your papers that you turned in, give me a full week to go through those and take my time to read through those real carefully, giving you some feedback. I'll have those graded within 1 week of the submission time, so 7 days. So those are just a couple of quick points and things that I noticed that would be helpful for you as you're all progressing through this course. Let's take a look here at the week 3 agenda. And let me remove myself here really quick. And what you'll see here, the weekly theme that I've placed is anthropology. You're going to see a lot of overlap of a lot of the themes, right? We're going to look at a couple of different things, but I try and emphasize what's one thing that I should really kind of hone in and focus on throughout this week. And I would say anthropology, the study of man, understanding man in general, would be kind of the focus. Man in the place of cosmology, right? In the place of creation, of God creating man. We're going to look at that from a couple of different perspectives as we go through this week. Let me briefly talk about each one of these as we move through and bring myself back up here really quick. So, Frederick, you have the second chapter now of the Christian view on persons, family, and communities. And again, this is you going through looking at man from a biblical worldview, from a biblical lens, and that Christian view of how should we view persons, families, and communities, because there are ways of which the secular behavioral sciences do see those differently, of what makes a successful family, what is the proper structure of a family, and what is marriage, and what is the necessity of marriage, what are the guidelines of marriage. Scripture has very, very specific guidelines for these things. And so this is, again, his second chapter as he goes through and further discusses that Christian perspective of persons, families, and communities, addressing both psychology and sociology. So do make sure you take the time to go through that reading with Frederick this week. Walters, this is a new book that we started this week in his text, Creation Regained. And really the emphasis is on that bottom part, right? The second to the title, where it says a biblical basis for a reformational worldview. And what he means by that is getting back to the Reformation, right? Of that kind of reformed perspective, or what are the roots and those deep guidelines of which we should understand things scripturally. And as you know, if you turn to the table of contents, in his particular book, he addresses only three particular areas: creation, fall, and redemption. Now, you could make a case that these are the three broad overarching theological concepts in Scripture as well, but these are the three that he specifically goes through and addresses. Now, your chapters to read this week are chapters 1 through 3, and some of you may still be kind of working. I saw in the discussion where some of you still may be working through a little bit what is a worldview and what does that really mean in the context. And just by going through this course, you've developed much knowledge of that, I'm sure. But one of the things that Walters does for us in his first chapter is he addresses that question, what is a worldview? And I think he gives a very good case and understanding for scripturally, biblically, and also just for the purposes of defining it, exactly what is a worldview. And he talks about the significance of that to our own personal and individual lives. Again, further addressing its connection to Scripture and its necessity to be planted and firmly rooted in Scripture. Now, in chapter 2, one of the things that Walters does that's a little bit different from let's say Ross, right, as we've been reading through More Than a Theory of Ross's book, is Walters is more concerned about understanding it from the Scripture standpoint of what is Scripture teaching, right? What is the theological principle or application that needs to be drawn out from Scripture. So he doesn't get into the 6-day debate. He doesn't get into the age of the earth debate, right, for the most part. His concern is theologically, what are the implications and ramifications that are taught in these three themes in Scripture of creation, redemption, and fall, and what are their applications to us as we live our lives today? He does address, right, creation. He does address the 6 days of creation, but he's not so much concerned, Walters isn't, about making a case for the extent of those, most certainly not scientifically like Ross is, but what is the most important things that we need to draw from theologically. Now, Walters does leave room for some of Ross's arguments. And to be honest, if you go through it very carefully, there's some areas where Walters and Ross would be a little bit at odds. And you'll have to see that as you go through in your reading carefully for the week. So chapter 2, he goes through creation, talking about the distinctiveness of the Western mind and how we tend to understand things as Westerners and not as maybe Protestant Christians. And so he kind of addresses some of those things, clarifying exactly what Scripture means and how we should view that. And he goes into a couple of terminology that has been there of how God used, basically how God created out of nothing, right? And he talks about the different framework and the different terminology that's been used historically to define these things. Trying to see if there's any other particular points. I made several notes here as I'm going through my own book, right? I'll show you guys as I'm going through digesting this stuff. I go through this book each time I teach the course, and I don't know if you can see it here, but I'm kind of running out of. You'll find that there's more highlighted than there is not highlighted, right? Going through it, I'm highlighting more than I'm not, so it's kind of hard to find out what are the points I'm trying to draw because I just keep on highlighting throughout there. But the scope of creation, what was intended in creation, what is communicated through Scripture and creation, these are all things that he's going to address in this chapter. And then as you get to the third chapter in Walter's book, as you're moving through it, he addresses the fall and exactly what does that mean? What are the implications? What's being drawn out from the fall, and what do we need to understand as Christians in our worldview in viewing the fall, and how did it really affect us? And he has great implications and what would be the other word that I'd use? Implications and just practicalities throughout his book. Now, Ross is going to continue in his argument, right? And as you know already from his reading, he's a theologian at heart as he's moving through, and but he's trained as an astronomer, and he's going to address now in his 2 chapters as he moves through of making a case again, trying to harmonize the true science that's being found with what Scripture teaches. As you know, he's an old earther. He believes that the earth is most certainly billions of years old. The earth itself, the universe is billions of years old. The earth itself is most likely millions. He does make that case of about probably 50,000 years of human history, tying that back to Adam. And again, he continues in making his account for that. So make sure you take the time to read through that carefully and intentionally. Now, the last thing here for the discussion board, well, I will say one more thing. Hugh Ross here also has this video on the flood. Take the time to watch that. There's no additional readings other than what's listed here this week, but this, and you also have this one video, but I think you'll find that very, very helpful too, to understanding more about Ross and his perspective as he addresses specifically the flood of Noah. Now, this week for the discussion board, the last thing that I want to talk about is, I told you guys before, make sure you specifically address each part of the question. So it says this: what do you believe about being made in the image of God? How do you understand the concepts of function, structure, and relation? So what are the concepts, right, of function? What are the certain ways that we were created in the image of God, right? So the concepts of function, certain things that we have as humans that were specifically created as a complement to being made in the image of God, and their structure and their relation really to one another. But all that tying back to that first one, what do you believe about being made in the image of God? What does that mean to be made in the image of God? What does that look like to be made in the image of God? What implications are there that we are made in the image of God? Incorporate information from this week's reading when developing a thoughtful response. Students' post should be 250 and should respond to at least 2 other students with a minimum of 50 words. Be sure to include quotes from the readings this week. I would prefer, it would be ideal if you could give me at least 1 quote from each of the chapters. Now, Ross is going to have a little bit of connection to it. You're going to find more of a connection with Walters and Frederick. However, what you need to make sure that you fully address here, just to be clear, is what do you believe about being made in the image of God? What does that mean? Why is that important? What are those things, right? What images are there that we are made in the image of God? And what is their function? What is their purpose? How do they connect to one another? These are the things you need to address. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please let me know. But happy reading to you guys this week. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'm here for you guys, and I look forward to seeing you and what you have to say in your discussion board. All right, I'll see you all soon, and take care.